Welcome and good evening or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Cynthia Chow, and I'm the director for the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies at the University of Iowa. Well, thank you very much for joining us for this very special Asian Pacific Heritage Month Looking Forward webinar that is co-hosted by the University of Iowa's Center for Asian and Pacific Studies and the Asian Pacific American Cultural Center. All over the United States, the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month is observed during the month of May. However, as May is exam frenzy time for us here at the University of Iowa, we are commemorating this month a little bit earlier in late April. The Asian Pacific Heritage Month is a time for everyone to recognize the contributions and influence Asian and Pacific Islander Americans to the history, culture, and achievements of the United States. And news headlines in recent times have also brought our attention to some of the challenges that Asian and Pacific Islander Americans have been facing. And while we need to address these challenges, we must also look forward. Hence the title of this special webinar. And this can only be achieved through the spirit of togetherness and unity. Hence, it is with immense pleasure that the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies and the Asian Pacific American Cultural Center thank the many units across the University of Iowa, as well as the many external community organizations in collaborating with us to make this webinar possible. With deep appreciation, they are the University of Iowa International Programs, the Department of Communication Studies, who is also co-sponsoring this webinar, and then the Department of Asian and Slavic Languages and Literatures, South Asian Studies Program, Pan-Asian Council, Asian American Student Union, and the UI Alpha Cup Delta Phi. We are also most grateful to our community collaborators, Alliant Energy, Treviro, and Iowa City Foreign Relations Council. Our two keynote presenters for today's webinar are Professor Russell Cheong from San Francisco State University and Dr. Sidney Yeh from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Incidentally, Dr. Yeh is also an alumni of the University of Iowa's Department of Communication Studies. Well, more about our distinguished speakers will be detailed by the moderator for this evening. And serving as moderator for today's webinar is Kayla Nguyen, who is the programming coordinator for the Asian Pacific American Cultural Center at the University of Iowa. As an undergraduate, Nguyen was the center's programming assistant and the student lead for the Asian Pacific American Cultural Center. And she was also heavily involved in multicultural student organizations and advocacy work. And upon graduating, Nguyen took on the full-time position at the University of Iowa's Asian Pacific American Cultural Center, and currently supervises 6 other students who are passionate about civic engagement within the Asian Pacific diaspora. Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs, Professor Russell Ghanem, would have been with us for this event, too, if he had not been scheduled for an overseas working trip at this point in time. However, he felt it important to share his message of welcome to all of you. Hence, we will now feature a message from him before I turn over this webinar to the moderator.
Good evening. My name is Russ Ghanem, and I'm the Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs at the University of Iowa. I'm sorry I can't attend tonight's webinar in person, but I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone attending this evening's observance of Asian Pacific Heritage Month. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies, as well as the UI Asian Pacific American Cultural Center. Our purpose is to celebrate the many contributions of our Asian Pacific American community while raising awareness around issues of identity and anti-Asian hate, as well as discrimination. We note that in 2021, International Programs and the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies sponsored a webinar on these topics. The response was overwhelmingly favorable. Since then, we have worked closely with CAPS to highlight the many ways in which the Asian Pacific American community enriches our campus. Along these lines, I would like to congratulate the UI Asian Pacific American Cultural Center on its 20th anniversary. The University of Iowa thanks you for making our campus stronger and more compassionate. In closing, I would like to thank the director of the Center of Asian and Pacific Studies, Professor Cynthia Chow, for organizing this event. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Amy Brewster, Amy Green, and Dan Vorwerk for their help as well. And finally, my appreciation goes to the panelists and the audience for their help in making tonight's event a success. Please enjoy the webinar, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we get started on introductions for those who are watching, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please add them to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're going to monitor questions that come in throughout the hour and provide them to our speakers and answer before the conclusion of the webinar. So I'll begin introducing Professor Russell Zhang. Russell Zhang is a professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. He is an author of books and articles on race and religion. His works include Family Sacrifices, The Worldviews and Ethics of Chinese Americans, published in 2019, as well as Mountain Movers, Student Activism, and the Emergence of Asian American Studies, also published in 2019, and At Home in Exile, Finding Jesus Among My Ancestors and Refugee Neighbors, published in 2016. In March 2020, Professor Zhang co-founded Stop API Hate, a coalition that was awarded the 2021 Webby Award for Social Movement of the Year. Professor Zhang was named as one of the Time 100 most influential persons in 2021 and received the Game Changer Award from the Asia Society in 2022.
Thanks, Kayla. And I'd like to thank the University of Iowa for inviting me today. I'm honored to be here with Professor Yue. And I especially want to thank Dr. Chow and Dr. Liu for organizing this great event. So congratulations on your 20th anniversary. Today, I want to talk about the racism that Asian Americans are facing at the moment and analyze it through the lens of the yellow peril stereotype. I want to talk especially and unpack how this stereotype is impacting our communities. And as the theme of this webinar is looking forward, hopefully I'll have time to talk about how we could address this stereotype and change the narrative. So the yellow peril stereotype that's been long-standing in the West is that Asians are an existential threat to the West. Starting with Genghis Khan and the Mongols in 1200, Westerners in Europe were really fearful of Asians invading and being able to conquer. In fact, Kaiser Wilhelm in the 19th century actually had a nightmare where he saw Japan rising from the east, coming and overcoming the West. And so he actually had this picture reproduced and he sent it to leaders of Europe, the King of England, the Emperor of Prussia, and warned that Japan, in the form of this Buddha, would come and threaten Christendom unless Europe unite against the invading hordes. So that's the notion of the yellow peril. Asians should be feared because they're dangerous, they're threatening, and they want to overcome the West. Today, that fear continues, and it's used time and time again by politicians because it works. Invoking fear, invoking the yellow peril idea, scapegoating Asian works for the politicians because then they rile up their base motivated by fear, voters motivated by anxiety, then vote and support these politicians. So let me share with you how it's operative now in the United States. today, the yellow peril, especially in the form of US-China antagonisms, is really dangerous. As US-China foreign policy worsens, that directly translates into Asian American domestic race relations policy. You could see that because China bashing, when politicians use rhetoric to basically hate on China, China bashing then leads to the bashing of Chinese people in the US and those who look like them. This has actually been demonstrated in a study by Princeton University researchers, and they found that people, Americans who saw China as a greater threat, were more likely to hold negative stereotypes about the Chinese. They then also have negative stereotypes of Chinese in the US and Asians in the US. They homogenize us so that Chinese in China, Chinese in the US, and Asian Americans are all similarly stereotyped. So the yellow peril has many dimensions, it has many tentacles in the way it seeks to concern American and strike fear in Americans. So I want to highlight now the different dimensions of this yellow peril operating now, and then also show you in the Stop AAPI reports, people share what people say to them when they're getting attacked. And you'll see the connection between the yellow peril and the attacks on Asians directly as you hear these quotes. So the first fear about the yellow peril is that Asians are a racial threat, that we're biologically different, that Chinese are overpopulated, and they're going to, again, overcome the West with their hordes of people. This negative attitude towards China is at its all-time low. Only 50% of Americans have favorable attitudes towards China, and 85% have negative attitudes. That then, this fear of the hordes of China as being racially different leads to certain types of racism. So Professor Chow, can you read this quote, please?
Roommate told me that the Chinese are filthy people who all deserve to die of COVID-19 and said it is no wonder all plagues spread from China. Said that the Chinese were selfish and horribly overpopulated, and they should have issued a zero-child policy so they could not proliferate.
Thanks. So you can see here, Chinese are portrayed as racially and biologically different. We're filthy. We're plague-ridden. We're overpopulated. We overproliferate. And instead, as a racial group, we should have had a zero-child policy. China is also America's top military threat. Both the Secretary of Defense, the FBI director, have said that China is America's greatest threat. In fact, government officials are more likely than the general public to say China is a military threat. And I think it's remarkable, even though Russia has invaded Ukraine and has clearly been an aggressor, again, the US is more afraid of China. So, Dong, can you read this quote?
A man right outside of the main Massachusetts General Hospital entrance yelled at me, "Why are you Chinese people killing everyone? What is wrong with you? Why are you killing us?"
And here in this quote again, the fear is that Chinese are so militaristic, we're so barbaric that we're killing everyone. Again, it's the fear of hordes, the numbers of China overcoming the West. Beyond being a military threat and a racial threat, China, with its communist system, is seen as a political threat. China is seen as the opposite of the United States. While the US is democratic, China is authoritarian, whereas the US is law-abiding, China is barbaric, whereas the US is freedom-loving, China abuses human rights. And so, and while America is God-fearing, China's communist system is godless. So in all these ways, the China's political system of communism is seen as evil and seeking to extend its power too much. So 77% of Americans believe that China interferes too much with foreign countries, even though the United States actually exerts more world influence. So maybe Dongwang, you can read this one.
While I was at the grocery store, another patron referred to me as another one of those damn Chinese trying to infect everyone into communism.
And so you can see here in this quote, again, China is seen to want to spread communism, and oftentimes Asian American public officials are seen as being disloyal. They're more loyal to China's communism than to the American government. China is also America's top economic competitor. As there's a trade imbalance, people see China stealing and taking away American jobs. And so again, 81% of Americans see economic competition with China as a problem. And of course, the economy is always America's greatest concern. It's the economy, stupid, candidates are told. And so again, scapegoating China for America's economic situation, its recession, its trade imbalances, and unemployment makes an easy scapegoat. There's a new fear about China. It's called techno-Orientalism, where China, with its production capacity and its superior technological capability, will then surpass the West. So there's a greater fear about China's technological capacity. So Dongwang, can you read this one?
I received the following voicemail message. I just wanted to let you know that China has lost their best customer, America. Everybody in America is not going to buy Chinese anymore. So I hope that your country struggles and everybody has no money. I think it's pretty ignorant for your government not to protect that virus, to let that virus come out and ruin the world. Thank you. Thanks, China.
So here you can see, again, China is seen as an economic competitor. America hopes China loses and therefore struggles, has no money. And so rather than seeking economic cooperation, America has a win-lose, zero-sum game in terms of economic competition with China. And finally, China is seen as a cultural threat. China is seen as exotic, foreign, and the reason why we had COVID was that Chinese people ate weird things, like this viral post of a Chinese person eating a bat. So again, most Americans blame China for the pandemic because of our eating habits, and therefore hate China and hate Chinese people. So Cynthia, can you read this last quote?
I was in line at the pharmacy when a woman approached me and sprayed Lysol all over me, and she was yelling out, "You're the infection. Go home. We don't want you here." I was in shock and cried as I left the building. No one came to help me.
So sadly here, Chinese are not only seen as being the disease carriers, but we are the infection ourselves. We, our racialized bodies, are the ones that are defiling America's purity, that are threatening America's health, that are corrupting America's morals. And so with nativist sentiment, the perpetrator says, we don't want Chinese here and tell us to go home. Time and time again in our reports, people tell individuals to go back to China. The result is that this person was in shock, despondent, and what made it doubly traumatizing was this person felt alone and isolated because no one came to help. So you could see how China now is the major threat to America, especially because of COVID. And as a result, there's been yellow peril responsibility policies. If China is seen as invading, the policy is to exclude, to keep Chinese and Asian people out. And sure enough, Since the pandemic, there's been several policies proposed to exclude Asians. President Trump banned Chinese scientists and researchers. He extended the Muslim ban. He cut refugee resettlement. He cut H-1B visas for professionals. He then suspended migration visas overall so that families couldn't reunite. All these policies sought to exclude Asians, whom were seen as the yellow peril, threatening the nation's health, security, and economy. Currently, there's more policies being proposed. Bans to keep Chinese from buying land in Texas, bans on TikTok, bans on books written by Chinese Americans. Time and time again, we're seen as the yellow peril threatening America's existence. Because of racism, people avoided Asian businesses. And during the pandemic, Asian revenues of businesses dropped 60%, 5 times more than other American businesses. And overall, because of the anti-Asian hate and the yellow peril, Asian American communities themselves have been impacted in terms of our health and mental health. And those of us who experience direct racism have been even more traumatized. In fact, over 50 studies have actually correlated the relationship between anti-Asian hate and poor mental health in our communities. So looking forward, facing this yellow peril threat, Asians could go into fight or flight mode. And it's true, we are fighting back. We are actually buying guns to defend ourselves. We're also fleeing. We're telling our elders to stay isolated, to not go out. But another way we can move forward is beyond going into fight or flight, we can flock. And that's what I see our Asian Americans community doing now. We're flocking at rallies to protect ourselves, at vigils to grieve together. We're flocking back to Chinatowns that are economically depressed. We're flocking to help our and chaperone our elders. We're flocking to hold fundraisers to support our communities. Students like here at University of Iowa have been flocking to organize for ethnic studies and Asian American studies. And because we flock so much, we were able to pass the hate crimes legislation almost unanimously. In California, we were able to secure $156 million to combat AAPI hate. Because we've been flocking, we've been able to build a huge global movement against anti-Asian hate. Here, NBA champion Steph Curry is making a public service announcement to stop AAPI hate. And when K-pop group BTS posted "Stop AAPI Hate," that tweet became the most retweeted post in the world in 2021. So looking forward, I see the way to challenge yellow peril is to flock. And what we need to do is basically change the narrative of America. America's yellow peril fears aren't about how they feel about Chinese. America's yellow peril fears are more about how Americans feel about themselves. Americans are afraid about losing its international standing. Americans are anxious about their economy. Americans are frightened by other groups coming into America. And so what I think we need to do moving forward is that Americans need to, instead of going into fight or flight mode, which they often do, is that Americans need to learn from us Asian Americans and learn to flock, and to flock with others who are different and flock together to address international issues like the pandemic, like the climate crisis, like international trade. So then we could dispel the yellow peril and then address the anxieties that our nation is facing. Thank you, and I look forward to the question and answers.
Thank you, Russell, for your amazing presentation. I'm going to now introduce Dr. Sydney Wei, who is an associate teaching professor in the Department of Communications at the University of Missouri-Columbia. She is also an alumni of the University of Iowa. It was here at Iowa that she attained her PhD from the Department of Communications. Dr. Yue is the author of Identity Politics and Popular Culture in Taiwan. A Saijiao Generation, which was published in 2016. This book won the 2018 Outstanding Book Award in the International and Intercultural Communication Division, National Communication Association of USA. Her recent 2023 co-edited book, Resistance in the Era of Nationalism, Performing Identities in Taiwan and Hong Kong, addresses forms of resistance and how people in Taiwan and Hong Kong respond to the big power politics between China and the United States. Dr. Yue serves on the board of directors for North American Taiwan Studies Association to promote Taiwan studies in North America. And just a reminder too, for viewers, that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please add them to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we're going to monitor those questions that come in and provide them to our speakers to answer at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla, for introducing me. Good evening, everyone. This is Sydney Yue, a 2012 Hawkeye doctoral graduate. Now I'm back home. I couldn't express more how touched I am at this moment. Thank you, all the sponsored departments and organizations at the University of Iowa. Thank you for inviting me. I was really thrilled when I got the invitation from Dr. Cynthia Zhou, Director of Center for Asian and Pacific Studies. And then after I realized that this particular event and to celebrate Asian Pacific American heritage, I felt even more humbled and more honored to be part of it. Although I could not see all the audience, I believe my advisor, Christine Munoz, is online watching me. So Christine, thank you. I guess probably this is one of the best moments I can show my gratitude to you. Thank you. All right. So Cynthia told me an article I wrote and published recently caught her attention. The article is titled, Speaking Broken English, Linguistic Minorities Building Cross-Cultural Alliances in U.S. Higher Education. In this article, I and my co-author, Reniel Periadas, also an Iowa alumna, wrote about our lived experiences as faculty of communication from Asia, studying, living, and working in the United States. Because of our identity as international women scholars of color, or more specifically, Asian immigrant women scholars, we identify 3 levels of linguistic discrimination against our non-standard English accents throughout our academic journey. These 3 levels are 1, institutional quality control of our accents and dialects. 2, disciplinary requirements for publishing in English. And 3, our everyday communication with locals. Yes, I just said discrimination we experienced throughout our academic journey, which means some unpleasant and traumatized experiences happened at the University of Iowa, my alma mater. So I actually asked Cynthia, are you sure you want to invite me? Have you read my article carefully? The University of Iowa was not well presented in the article, but she confirmed, she said, yes. The aim of this webinar is to highlight issues currently faced by Asian Pacific American community. One of the issues is the critical role that language plays in intercultural communication. And our article definitely addresses this issue. So here I am, celebrating Asian Pacific American heritage and freedom of speech, right? Again, thanks to the University of Iowa for inviting me, even though I had some criticism in the article about you. So today, I will use several stories to begin my speech. These stories show how my Asian body becomes hindrance in intercultural communication, especially in the US context. The main reason is people's preoccupied perception about Asian and Asian American. Then I will talk about some directions we all can do to improve the quality of intercultural communication when we encounter Asians who speak English with a strange, foreign, or unfamiliar accent. This linguistic discrimination can be linked to another issue, that is, how English hegemony shapes the structure and the merit system in US higher education. I want to introduce the ongoing projects a group of international women communication scholars thrived to do in changing culture. Finally, I will share how we can look forward in celebrating Asian Pacific American heritage. So the first story about everyday linguistic discrimination happened in 2019. I mentioned this story in my article. I described how frustrated I was when I realized a local friend viewed me as an inferior outsider. We were having lunch together, and my friend suddenly just told me, "Sydney, your English is great, you know. I barely understood you when I first met you 7 years ago." I tried to be calm, as if this comment were not a big deal. I smiled, but I knew how hard I tried to control my facial muscles in that moment. 7 years ago, that was when I had received my doctoral degree after I defended my dissertation in English, taught undergraduate courses for 5 years in English, and thrilled my English oral capacity at a renowned institution, the University of Iowa. So despite my understanding of her goodwill to express how delighted she was to see my acculturation into the local community, her words hurt. This friend felt entitled to judge my English with her own Southern accent. To be fair, sometimes I had a difficulty to understand her English. But what did I do? I listened. I listened with patience. People's preoccupied perception hinders their communication capacity. I remember during the last few days before I departed from Iowa to my new destination, I managed to give some slightly broken furniture pieces away for free. And I posted the message on Craigslist. I hope you still know what Craigslist is. But anyway, an Iowa man contacted me saying he could come to pick up a cabinet. When he arrived, I had to say, the experience of having a conversation with him is one of the most mysterious moments I have ever had in my life. It seems that there was a transparent, thick wall between him and I. I spoke English to him, just as what I'm doing right now. I used complete sentences. I spoke fluently with my Asian accent. But this man couldn't understand a word out of my mouth, as if my words were automatically translated into an alien language through that wall. He kept saying, "I'm sorry, I don't understand you. What did you say?" When I tried to explain to him where the damage was on the cabinet, he looked so perplexed, nervous, and frightened. Eventually, I had to communicate with this middle-aged white man with single words and a lot of hand gestures. "Look, here, broken. Okay. Yeah." And he could finally understand me. I didn't know which part of Iowa he was from, but obviously he did not have much experience encountering an Asian like me. My Asian buddy was such a distraction, keeping him from concentrating on what I was saying to him. And his preoccupied perception about Asians degraded his ability of understanding English, his mother tongue. In this example, we see how preoccupied perception and linguistic discrimination could cause a big difficulty in intercultural communication. So what we should do? After graduating, I teach and conduct research in intercultural communication. I work with many international women scholars, trying to make undergraduate students aware of our efforts and improve teacher-student relationship in classroom. These are my pals. Some are working on critical communication pedagogy. Some are dedicated to East Asian international relations, and we all want to make our voices heard. An often neglected aspect of communication within my discipline is listening. When we developed our communication pedagogy, our focus is much more on teaching students how to speak, express, and persuade others properly. But listening skills are an undervalued and understudied area. We believe that by refocusing on listening, we can forge a community for linguistically oppressed individuals. It also allows our discipline to radically alter our campuses by intentionally creating a shared space of consciousness among international and other stigmatized English-speaking writing students, and potentially normalizing people's non-standard English accents. Therefore, we believe the following 3 steps are essential. First, we need to refocus on students' listening ability in the communication curriculum and train them with that ability. Second, we need to identify linguistically oppressed individuals and cultural groups, then develop mutual empathy so that we can support and empower each other. Finally, we need to recognize the problematic English-only, English hegemony in US higher education and propose policy change. I heard that things are quite different at the University of Iowa compared to 11 years ago. A committee has formed to examine the English proficiency test for international teaching assistants. The committee proposed to change policy and evaluation criteria to help international teaching assistants do their job despite their various English accents. This is one example of alliance building to empower linguistic minorities. Asian immigrants and the Asian Pacific American community can definitely be part of this effort, forge a strong community. The projects I am involved in serve beyond the Asian Pacific American community. The members include scholars from Asia, Africa, and South America. We do see the potential of forming a diverse linguistic minority solidarity. And we also invite those who speak mainstream standard English to be our allies. Your words have significant influence in students' perception of international scholars. So in 2007, I became a doctoral student and an international teaching assistant at the University of Iowa. And in 2012, I began my career in the US higher education. In this 15 years, I learned and thrived with a lot of people's help. from a privileged Taiwanese to become a proud member of Asian Pacific American community. And I also see how my identities change in different cultural contexts. In celebrating Asian Pacific American heritage, I appreciate this opportunity to share my stories and my research with you. Most importantly, I appreciate this opportunity to introduce the concept of linguistic discrimination so that we can all work together to improve intercultural communication and make Asian Pacific American heritage no longer invisible. Thank you very much. And I'm looking for your comments and questions.
Yay. Thank you so much to both Professor Russell Jeung and Dr. Sydney Gui for being part of this webinar for Asian Pacific American Heritage Month celebration at the University of Iowa. We're going to get started with our Q&A session, and I'm going to start off with asking some questions. So your first question to both of y'all. Currently, there has been much debate about the existence of DEI programs. What impact would that have on the AAPI community, and can the AAPI community flock to address this issue?
I could start. And so the controversy, if I understand it, about the DEI policies, especially at the corporate level, is that these trainings to encourage multiculturalism and to promote better diversity and inclusion are mandatory. And because of the mandatory nature, people resist it and rebel and therefore don't learn the content of DEI. And so that's one response, is it's not effective. But even more so now, some policymakers are calling for cutting and banning DEI because they're actually calling out individuals for being racist, and they're too offensive for white employees. And so in certain states, they're calling to ban DEI trainings. And I was actually banned last year, and because President Trump banned DEI programming for federal employees. And I think it's really unfortunate. I think, as Professor Yue said, our communities are becoming increasingly diverse, and rather than trying to have English hegemony and a certain sort of monocultural corporate culture, we need to understand how to work with different types of people, and we need to learn to listen to different types of values and ideas, and we need to learn to appreciate the strengths of every group. That's how America can improve. That's how American corporations can improve. So I think this effort to ban DEI is going to backfire, right? Again, it just, to people of color, says that your perspective, your values aren't important. We're going to try to maintain a corporate culture where certain groups dominate and their cultures are more accepted, more privileged, more normalized. And that then would actually hurt communities of color who are already feeling excluded. So to me, this fight over DEI is just another, we call it a dog whistle. It's another scapegoat that politicians are using to strike up fear and mobilize their base.
Thank you. I received another question. So within the Asian community, many hold anger and pain against each other due to the complex history of wars between various Asian countries. How do we flock for a better future?
Professor, yeah, you can go first.
Can you repeat the question? Because I was just looking at a long question. I so distracted. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. I will repeat it. So within the Asian American community, many hold anger and pain against each other due to the complex history of wars between various Asian communities. So how do you think we should flock for a better future?
Yeah, I like the concept, Dr. Chen, you say that a flock basically is like a getter together. So we kind of do things, try to without thinking about our differences, because if we have the same goal, we can put aside our differences for a moment and do things together. So I guess like from the organizational communication perspective, goal setting is definitely the most important thing when we start a project and we want to work together. So I understand, I'm from Taiwan and I have a strong Taiwanese identity, but if we are going to work with Chinese people, I think it's possible. It's just like we need to put our political view aside and then really think what we want to do and what we want the Asian American community visible. What would be the big goal? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I agree that having overarching goals help different communities come together, where they don't see themselves as Chinese or Taiwanese or African American or Latino. But if you have an overarching goal for like a neighborhood, then you see yourselves as residents of Oak Park, for example. And it doesn't mean you put aside your other identities. It just means for this project or for this activity, for this overarching goal, you come together with a different group identity and you could really then work together. And that flocking mechanism, whether it's to protect yourself from anti-Asian hate or to promote ethnic studies or to promote DEI efforts, then you can, set aside your identities. I think, though, at a deeper level, for real deeper solidarity, I think we do need to confront some of the barriers and some of the pains and some of the traumas that do divide us. And in that level, for example, the United States, maybe there's a lot of racial divides, and you can't just maybe at a war, then we could come together as Americans. But we still also need to address the racial division, right? And I think to address the racial division, or within the Asian American community, the ethnic divisions, we really do need to hear the truth, to hear how others have been harmed, and then to seek repair, right? And that's what truth and reconciliation efforts are for, to gain hearing, to have people apologize, to have groups compensate and make repairs. So I think for real deep community solidarity, truth and reconciliation processes are really needed. I think we need that for the United States. And within the Asian American community, maybe we need that too, to bring groups together.
Thank you so much. I think we have a lot of questions, so I'm just looking through them real quick. So one of the questions that I've seen, I'll read it out loud. So living in the Midwest, I have found that many people feel like API folks don't experience hate and discrimination the same way as other groups. Therefore, we don't have anything to worry about, and it feels as though our grief and pain doesn't matter or exist. How would you address this matter if someone approached you with this notion? And I think Dr. Russell-Jeung, if you could answer this first, that'd be great.
Okay. Maybe Asian Americans don't experience hate and discrimination the way other groups do. Maybe we're not seen or stereotyped or profiled the way other groups are, but this isn't an oppression Olympics. But to say that Asian Americans haven't faced direct discrimination may be true. Maybe you haven't been taunted. Maybe you haven't had someone tell you to go back to China. But I think Asians face institutionalized discrimination and are unaware of it. So if you think about your curriculum and what gets taught in your school, how often do you hear about Asian American history? How often do you read Asian American authors in English? How often do you learn about Asian American issues in your social science classes, right? Oftentimes our communities are erased, we're invisible. And that too is a form of discrimination in that we're not acknowledged. You know, Dr. Yeo talked about being invisible And so because we're seen as invisible, we're treated again as perpetual foreigners, as outsiders, as a yellow peril. We're not seen as normal part of America. So you may subconsciously think, oh, I haven't faced direct discrimination, but you may have been facing institutionalized discrimination where Asian Americans are invisibilized, and therefore you may feel less important in America. You may feel like you don't belong in America. You may feel like you're trapped into certain fields. So I would challenge this notion that Asian Americans don't face discrimination. I think in a lot of ways, if you don't see Asian Americans in Hollywood, if you don't see Asian American elected leaders, if you don't see Asian Americans as leaders in your university, if Asian Americans face language discrimination, like Dr. Yeo talks about, those are all forms that seem normal, but are really unfair and hurtful. So, there's another question about language discrimination that I think is really relevant to this discussion.
I guess I can offer an observation, in Midwest, also challenge that perception, Asian American in the Midwest probably not has less discrimination against compared to other ethnic groups or racial groups. But my question is that, I am an immigrant, and so I view myself as the outsider and try to be an insider. So the perpetual foreigner ideal, I think I can accept because it's partly true to me. However, I stay in the Midwest, but I witnessed a lot of Asian American scholars, students, they finished or they found a better job, they leave. I guess what's the reason? If they feel comfortable, they don't feel any isolation or be treated very well. Why can they stay in Midwest? Right? What's the reason that they want to go to the West Coast or East Coast to find more people who like them? Right? I guess that says something. Even though you do not encounter like blended discrimination or blended challenge, it doesn't mean this discrimination does not exist or mild to you or to this particular cultural group. It's just in different form. And we need to definitely dig deeper to see what's the reason, right? Because a lot of the people Asian American can here to have education, but fewer of them choose to stay. And why? What's the reason? I guess this is just a question we need to explore further.
Thank you. We're running a little bit out of time, so this will be our last question. And this is directed to you, Dr. Yue, and Russell, if you would like to add anything on after, that'd be awesome too. So I'll read this out loud. So Dr. Yue, thank you for your presentation. I'm intrigued by the concept of linguistic discrimination you propose, and I'm interested in your thoughts on how this can be investigated. A few months ago, I received a call for papers addressing the possibility of ethnographies of listening, culturally situated studies focused around observation, interviewing, and textual analysis. That seeks to show cultural specific norms and premises about listening. It seems to me your stories of what you have faced are the beginning of an ethnography of listening among U.S. Americans. Do you have further thoughts on how you might continue such research, or would you have other ideas on how to explore this phenomenon?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Christine Munoz is my advisor. You're here. I'm very happy. So I guess there's some practical way for U.S. Americans to understand that linguistic discrimination. So for example, in my class, I usually have a section about this. There's a lot of websites recording many people speaking similar content, but with different accents. So I want students to listen and try to figure out, a lot of them are actually American, American speakers, English speakers. They are native English speakers, but their accents is just so diverse around the nation. So it's not just a foreign accent, but it's like a nationwide. There are so many rich different accents existing in this country. So they need to recognize that everybody has an accent. It's not like you have no accent, that kind of a perception. And secondly, I also ask my students to close their eyes sometimes when they listen, just really train their listening ability. And I guess like starting from there, we can gradually change people's perception. You know, when you cannot see who is speaking, you don't have problem understanding them. Yeah. So I just simply answered this, here.
Yeah, just to wrap up, but when Americans were asked what accents in English do they favor and which accents do they find grating, it's clear there are certain languages that are preferred, and then the other lower groups get discriminated against, right? And so if you have a French accent, for example, people think it's romantic and charming, but the Chinese accent was seen as grating and awkward. And so even in our English language accents, there's a hierarchy by which people are favored and people face disadvantage. And that's another subtle way of discrimination. But we who are, let's say, we're Chinese, we're always treated that way because we always have this accent. So we don't know what it would be like if we had a charming accent, right? So we're sort of oblivious to the discrimination that we're experiencing because we're always treated as somebody, maybe an immigrant with an accent. But that then leads to that overall sense of not belonging. That then leads to the overall sense, oh, I want to go to the West Coast that Dr. Buell talked about. So I think, this concern, like Asian Americans don't face discrimination. I think there are real subtle ways of why we feel like we belong or whether we feel like outsiders that are linked to discrimination. And that's what moving forward looks like. We need the diversity. We need these types of trainings so that we could learn to listen to each other and appreciate each other more.
Thank you both for those amazing answers. I'm going to pass it off to Cynthia Chow to close the event. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, as we come to a close of this evening's webinar, I would really like to thank, all our partners, our audience, and especially to Professor Russell Cheung and Dr. Sydney Yue for commemorating the 2023 Asian Pacific Heritage Month with us. And even as we pay tribute to the significant contributions Asian and Pacific Islander Americans have made to the many facets of the history, the culture, and the achievements of the United States, as well as some of the challenges that we face today, let's move forward and let's celebrate this unique journey of all Asian and Pacific Islander immigrants and citizens in the United States. So let us use the richness of our life experiences and our traditions, as well as our continued refinement of our abilities to make a difference. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and good evening.